Okay, good morning. Our learning is going to be Lezecher Nishmas Mindel, Mariam Bas Kalman Ruvain, her Neshama Shavan Aliyah. Okay, so let's just quickly review. The Gemaras that we're learning right now are quite technical. The first part of the Gemara we're going to be learning is a little bit technical, and we are eventually, I hope we get to a Tosfos in the top of Daf Gimel, which is quite relevant to our day-to-day living, I would argue. So let's just quickly review. Our Mishnah began by saying there's two that are outside that are four, and two that are inside that are four. What in the world does that mean? What that means is as follows. The Gemara is talking about a person standing on the outside that we're referring to as an ani, as a poor person, and there are two different scenarios that are biblical, that are d'oraisa, and there are two that are d'Rabbanan. What are the two that are biblical? Where the ani, where the poor person does both the lifting up and the putting down. In that case, he lifts up from the private domain, puts into the public domain, and there he is in violation of Akira and Anacha, and therefore going from one domain into another domain. Okay, so that is something which is biblically prohibited, something which is Asr Midoraisa, and that is one scenario. The other scenario is where he takes something from inside, right? He takes like the piece of bread from inside and then moves it outside. So he lifted up from inside and brought it outside. That is again Akira, a lifting up, and Hanacha, placing down. That is once again biblically prohibited. That's Akira and Hanacha, and that is another scenario, right? One is where the story starts outside, and one where the story starts inside. In both cases, the poor person does everything. Those are the two that are taking place outside, because the poor person's outside, and those are the two cases that are d'oraisa. And then you have the two cases which are on the outside, but they are not asr midoraisa. They are going to be asr, but not something which you'd have to bring a korban chatas for. Okay, that's where the ani, the poor person, picks up the bread or picks up the basket, lifts it up, but then the balabayas takes it from his hands, right? So he only does half of the action. You still shouldn't do half an action, but that is not completely prohibited. That is partially prohibited. It's prohibited, but it's not something where you'd have to bring a korban chatas or you would get killed for if there was warning, right? And so you have two scenarios like that. One is where he lifts it up and then the Baal Habayis takes it, or the other is the Baal Habayis starts lifting it up and he takes it from the Baal Habayis' hands. In both those cases, it's asr, but it's not completely asr in the sense that you would bring a korban chatas, okay? And then we have the two scenarios where the from the inside, which is where the Baal Habayis starts the process. He's the one who lifts up the bread from his own domain and puts it into the poor person's hands, or vice versa. Those are completely prohibited. Those are scenarios where you would bring a korban chatas, and then there's a scenario where they share it. Again, it's starting from the Baal Habayis, the guy standing on the inside, and those are the two which are on the inside, okay? Those are the two outside and two and two, right? The two which are four, and two which are four, two which are four on the inside, two which are four on the outside. Got it? Is that more or less?
Inside is Asr Midoraisa also? Meaning
it's Asr Midoraisa, correct, okay. Correct. 100% Asr Midoraisa, right? Meaning, in other words, if a person's doing a Kir V'Hanacha, the Baal Habayis who's standing on the inside, lifts up a piece of bread from the inside of his house and puts it on the outside and rests on the outside, 100% it's Asr Midoraisa. Okay, so you have two scenarios where the Baal Habayis is doing something which is Asr Midoraisa, you'd have to bring a korban chatas, and two scenarios where the poor person, and then two additional scenarios for each where they're each doing half of the action, still Asr, but not Asr, you would have to bring a korban chatas. Got it? That's more or less the Mishnah. And now the next Amud is really going to be discussing, getting into some question about when the Mishnah over here and the Mishnah in Shavuos says two that are four, what exactly are we referring to? Okay, a bit technical, but hold on tight and hopefully we'll get through it together. So we're going to start again on the bottom of Amud Beis, Amud Aleph, Tanan Hasam, right where the Gemara begins. You see that? Tanan Hasam? So the Gemara begins. Tanan Hasam, we learned over there. Where's there? In Shavuos. Shavuos, Shtaim Shein Arba. Again, we had a scenario where there are two different types of oaths, two different types of swearings, Shein Arba, which are really four. And we're not going to go over the details again, is that there are two which are explicit in the Torah, two oaths that are explicit in the Torah, which are four, meaning then we extrapolate two other ones that are in the Torah as well. Yedios Hatuma, Shtaim Shein Arba. Then we have two scenarios where a person is going to be tamei, and then they come into contact with things they should not become tamei with. Two scenarios which are explicit in the Torah, Shein Arba, and we extend it to two other scenarios which are less explicit but also Asr. Okay, and so that's Shtaim Shein Arba, Maros Negaim Shtaim Shein Arba, and then we have two scenarios of types of tzaras, which are explicit, Shein Arba, which we extend to two more scenarios, Yetzios HaShabbos Shtaim Shein Arba, and then, and this is where we're all getting at, the Mishnah concludes by stating that there are two types of Yetzios, of Shabbos, two types of prohibitions on Shabbos, which are really four. So that's the end quote of the Mishnah in Shavuos. Now the Gemara asks as follows, Maishna hacha detani beis shein arba bifnim, ubei shein arba b'chutz. Why is it that here in Masechah Shabbos does it have 8 scenarios? It says in Shabbos, the Mishnah began by saying there are 2 which are for the guy on the inside, 2 which are for the guy on the outside, right? Which is a total of 8. Umayshna hasam, and why over there in Shavuos detani shtaim shein arba v'sulo? Does it say 2 which are 4 and no more? So basically, the simple question, the question is as follows: why is it in Masechah Shavuos does it only list 4 scenarios of transfer of from domain to domain, whereas in Masechah Shabbos it has 8 scenarios from domain to domain? That's the question. Okay, so the Gemara is going to try to answer this question. The Gemara begins, and this is what we saw yesterday. Hacha de'ikar Shabbosu. Here, meaning in Masechah Shabbos, what we're learning, it is the main focus is Shabbos, right? That's the name of the Masechta. Tani avos. Vitani tolados. We therefore learn both what is called an av malacha and a tolda. Okay, what is an av? What is an av and what is a tolda? An av literally is a father. A tolda literally is a descendant. What that means is that there are things which are found explicitly in the Torah. Those are called the av malachos. Right, there are 39 av malachos, which we're going to get into over the course of the Masechta. And then there are things which we extrapolate from them, like a child who is extrapolated from a child, we'll say, or from a parent, okay, sort of. The point is that there are things which are not as explicit, which are tolados or toldos, right? And so the Gemara answers in Masechah Shabbos, which is, here we're really focusing, here we're really delving in, so that's why we go into much more detail. Why? Because here, we're not only talking about the Av. What's the Av? As Rashi told us, the Av is going from the private domain to the public domain. That was the original source of going from place to place, right? If you recall, Moshe tells the Jewish people, do not take your items. Stop donating to the Mishkan. You're donating to the Mishkan. Stop donating to the Mishkan. And stop taking from your private tents and bringing it to the public place, right? So that is the Av Malacha. And the Tolda is, just like it's prohibited to go from private to public, we extrapolate what's the difference from a conceptual place. What's the difference if the Torah tells you you cannot go from your private tent to the public domain? Similarly, it should be usher to go from the public place to the private domain. And therefore, that's the Tolda. That's what we extrapolate from the Av. With me? Right? So basically, we're saying, so here in Masechah Shabbos, we learn both the Avos and the Toldos, whereas in Shavuos, where it's not the main thing, we just focus on the Av, we just focus on the main one, we're not really going into detail, right? In other words, in a place where we're focusing on these laws, we're going to go into details. In a place where we're not focusing on the laws, we're just going to stick to the major categories. Questions? Thoughts? That make sense? Yeah, next.
The assumption, right, is that it should be the same in both places. Why would we assume that? It seems fairly logical that when you're talking about Shabbos, you're going to get into all the details.
Yeah.
When you're just looking for a parallel, that's the parallel that you're finding.
Yeah, so you're saying it's a good answer. I think the question is stemming from the fact that it gives a list, and if it gives a list, it sounds like it's an exhaustive list, meaning typically if the Mishnah is going to give us a list, you assume if it says 39, let's say you had a Mishnah in Shabbos which says there are 39 malachos, and a Mishnah in Shavuos says there are 22 malachos. You're like, what's going on? Which one is it? So yeah, the answer, the point is that you'd assume if there's a listing with a number, that the assumption is that it's an exhaustive list, and the answer is exactly like you're saying, yeah, one place it's the focus, and therefore we're going to go into all the details, one place is not the focus, and we're not. Yeah, so the Gemara continues, Hasam, there, meaning in Shavuos, the lav ikar Shabbosu, it is not the main focus of Shabbos. Avos Tani, it only mentions the Avos, i.e. going from the private domain to the public domain, Tolados Latani, but it doesn't mention the extensions, i.e. going from a public domain to the private domain. The Gemara now asks, Avos Mainihu. Let's unpack this. What are the Avos? Yitzios, all right? Going out, meaning going out is meaning I'm in my house, private domain, and I'm going out into the public domain. So the Gemara asks, Yitzios Trei Havyan. But there are only 2 scenarios of going out from the private domain that are Asur Midoraisa, right? Who's the guy in the private domain? The Baal Habayis in this scenario, right? So the owner of the house, he's in the private domain. And there are 2 cases where he himself is there's an Akira and Anacha, where he either takes his basket, starts in the private domain and puts it into the public domain, or he takes it from the public, right? Or another scenario where we're going to go out from the private domain into the public domain. So Bechitema, so the Gemara is asking, Mitzios Trei Havyan. There are only 2 scenarios of Avos, which are Asur. V'chitema, and if you want to say mehen lechiyuv, mehen leptur, so you want to tell me that the Mishnah in Shavuos is giving us 2 scenarios of where there is a chiyuv, where you're going to be, where it's asur for taking something from inside to outside, and then the other 2 scenarios are where you share the action, where the Baal Habayis or the ani, pick it up, and then the other person finishes the action. Right? In other words, if you're telling me, let's just pause. In Shavuos, you're telling me we're only talking about avos. What is the av? The av is going out from the private domain into the public domain. but we only had two scenarios where you're going to be full-fledged chayav, and two scenarios where it's going to be asr, but not full-fledged chayav, right? So the Gemara is asking, so wait a second, you're telling me in Shavuos we have two scenarios where you're full-fledged chayav and two scenarios where you're not, right? Now there's two scenarios where it's pater aval asr, where it's going to be forbidden, but not biblically prohibited. As we'll see, that doesn't make sense. The Mishnah gives a whole list, and in that list, okay, in that list you have all these different scenarios. It talks about Shavuos, or it talks about Tzoras, Negaim, right? And by the Negaim, it doesn't have a list of two which are problematic and two which are not problematic. All four are equally problematic, just two are explicit and two are less explicit. So the Gemara is going to assume that the listing is consistent. If you say there are two types of, there are Negaim which are 2 and 4, and there are Shavuos which are 2 and 4, and in those, you are completely biblically prohibited. So you're going to assume the Shabbos list is also 2 and 4, which you're completely prohibited. And yet now you're telling me that the Shabbos list is 2 which you're prohibited and 2 which are not full-fledged prohibited. So the list is a little bit inconsistent, right? So the Gemara says, Ma hasam kula chiyuva, just like those other ones in that list are full-fledged chayav, meaning full-fledged asr or full-fledged the negaim, they're going to be full-fledged negaim. Af hachanami kula chiyuva. Here too, the list of Shabbos should also be chayav, and based on the way you're telling me, which is that it's avos, it's not full-fledged chayav. Ella Amra Papa, so Papa gives a new answer, a new way of understanding the Mishnah over there. Hacha Diker Shabbos, who here in Masechah Shabbos, Tani Chiyuve Upture. Here in Masechah Shabbos, we learn both cases of obligation and cases where you are exempt. Hasam Delav Iker Shabbos, who there in Masechah Shavuos, where it is not the focus of Shabbos, Chiyuve Tani Upture Lo Tani, we're only learning the obligated cases, the case where you're chayav, and not the cases where you're exempt. So what's the Gemara now saying? The Gemara is now saying that in Shavuos, we thought the first answer was saying that the 2 and 4 in Shabbos was 2, meaning just avos of going out, right? Meaning these are two cases of going out. Those are av melachos. Now the Gemara is saying, no, that wouldn't make sense because in the 4, the 2 extra ones are cases where you're not full-fledged chayav, right? Right? Now we're saying, no. In Shavuos, when it said 2 and 4, you know what it was referring to? It was referring to both going in and going out. And now we understand. We're saying that there are two scenarios that you are full-fledged chayav for. 2 meaning there are going ins and going outs. That's 1 and 2, going in and going out. There are two types of scenarios, one going in and one going out, which are 4 because there are 4 scenarios of going in or going out. But basically we're saying now that the 2 and 4 in Shavuos are all focused on full-fledged chayav. We're no longer saying that the 2 are both referring to going out, which are avos. Now we're saying the 2 is one is going in, one is going out, which apply in 4 different scenarios. Right? In other words, let's just speak of those scenarios. We have the guy standing on the outside, the poor person, and there are 2 scenarios where there's going to be chiyuv. There are 2 scenarios of going in, which 2 scenarios of going in, which are chayav d'oraisa, and 2 scenarios of going out, which are chayav d'oraisa. And now we're saying the Mishnah in Shavuos is focusing on also things which you're chayav for, and yitzios and hachnasos, both going out and going in as well. Okay? Now, there are those who say, the Ramban says that based on this answer, what the Gemara is actually retracting what it said earlier. What we assumed earlier was that just going out was an av malacha and going in was a tolda. And now when the Gemara is rejecting that, it's actually retracting that thought. And now saying that both going in and going out are both av malachos. Okay, that's how the Ramban understands this Gemara, that the Gemara is retracting that initial assumption. Okay, fine. Let's go a little bit further. The Gemara is now just going to prove. Let's see it inside. The Gemara asks, wait, you're telling me that the Mishnah in Shavuos, I told you it's a little technical, just bear with me. The Mishnah in Shavuos is talking about scenarios of chiyuv. What are those? Yitzios tarte havyan. But there are only 2 scenarios of yitzios. So the Gemara says, no, shtaim dotza, shtaim dachdasa. This is what I already set out, but now he's spelling it out. No, when the Mishnah says there are 2 and 4, it's 2 cases of going out, 2 cases of going in. Now the Gemara asks a very technical question. Vayitzios katani, the Mishnah said, yitzios. Yitzios is just going out, not going in. So Amar Vashi, tana achnasa, nami hotza karila. That going in is also called going out. Even though the Mishnah says, right, how's our Mishnah begin? And that Mishnah, yitzios Shabbos. Right, which says just going out. So Rav Ashi says no. Even though it says going out, that term could also encompass going in. Okay?
Because you're
going out of a domain. Excellent. That's where Rav Ashi is going to spell out. Good. Mimai, how do you know this? First, it proves it. Means nan hamotzi mirshus l'rshus chayav. The Mishnah later on, in many towards in about a 90 dot from here, it says a person who goes out from domain to domain, you are chayav. Milo askinan dekama ayal mershus rabim mershus hayachid. And there, the Mishnah is talking about going from the public domain to the private domain, and yet it says going out. Vikokari la hotzan. It refers to it as a going out. V'taimamai. Why is that? As Shlomo just said, kol akiras chayfetz mimkomo tana hotza karila. Anytime you remove something from its domain, that's called going out. Right? In other words, when we say going out until now, we thought going out means going out from your home into the public domain. Now we're saying, no, don't focus on the object. Anytime an object goes from one domain to another, it is going out. It's going out from its place. And therefore, although it says hotzaos, which means going out, it doesn't mean going out from your home. It just means taking the object out from its place into another place.
That's how the Ramban understands that's all avos, because hotza means going out from a domain to a domain.
Good. Then it could be encompassing either one. Yeah, right. Okay. Ravina brings another proof. This Masnisa Nami Dika Diktani. The Mishnah over here also implies this Yitzios, because the Mishnah begins by saying Yitzios. And what's the first case of our Mishnah? The first case for Mishnah is the ani, the poor person, taking his basket and bringing it in, right? And the first case is a case of someone taking the basket and bringing it in. So you see that Yitzios could mean going in both directions. Shema Mina, Rava Amar, however, Rava, and the Ramban says Rava is actually going with the first assumption, that Yitzios is dafka, that it's only going out from the private domain to the public domain. That is the Av Malacha. So he says no, Rishuyos Ketani, that when it says Yitzios actually means rishuyos, domains. That when the Mishnah says there are two that are four, the way to read the Mishnah in Shavuos is there are two domains, public domain and private domain, and there are four applications of that domain. And basically the way in doing so, he is able to maintain that the two is not referring to going in and going out, rather, and which would therefore mean that they are both avos, like Rapapa, based on the way Rav Ashi is explaining it, but rather, Rishuyos Ketani, there are two domains, private and public, and they have four applications, but he's able to maintain that original assumption that it's only going out, which is the Amalacha, Rishuyos Ketani, Rishuyos Shabbos time. There are two different domains of Shabbos. So again, very technical, but let's just summarize. Basically, the bottom line is it's a very technical discussion, debate about how to understand, how to reconcile the Mishnah in Shavuos with the Mishnah in Shabbos, where the Mishnah in Shabbos has 8 scenarios, and the Mishnah in Shavuos has 4, and the way to do so is basically depends on how you understand it, but it seems like in Shavuos, the short answer is that in Shavuos it's a much briefer list, whereas in Shabbos it's a much broader list, and the question is how to understand the brief list, how to understand the broad list. That's the basic takeaway, that in Shabbos, to your question earlier, to your answer, that basically in Shavuos, it's going to be a much broader list in Shabbos, where we're focusing, we're going to go into much more detail. Okay, now the Gemara now asks another question, and that is that our list is actually incomplete. Now we're back to our list over here in Masech Shabbos. Again, how many scenarios did we have in our list over here? 8. Good. So Rav Masna is going to ask a question. Amalei, by the 2 dots on the bottom of Beis, Amud Beis. Amalei Rav Masna la Abaye. Hatamne Havyan. You're telling me there are 8 scenarios. Tarte Srein Havyan. There's actually 12. Why are there 12 scenarios? Because it's not really 12. What he's asking is that although there are 8 scenarios, there are actually 12 rulings. Why are there 12 rulings? Because if you think about it, the last cases where they're sharing, there is a ruling for the poor person, right? In other words, in the cases where the last case of the Mishnah was a case where the poor person outside takes his basket and puts it into the hands of the poor person, the balabais, the balabais takes it out of his hands. So now it's one scenario, but there's a ruling for the poor person that what you did is prohibited, but not chayav achatas, and there's a ruling for the balabais, what you did is prohibited, but not a chatas. So actually the last 4 scenarios are actually doubled up, right? So there should be 12. The Gemara then asks, wait, l'tamech shitzrei havyan. Wait, according to your question, is actually 16. Why? Because the first cases where the poor person did everything, or the Baal Habayis did everything, there's also a ruling, they're doubled up. Because the poor person was, yes, you're full-fledged chai, but the Baal Habayis is full-fledged pater. Right? So the Gemara says, Amalei, halo kasha. No. Your second question of saying 16, that's not a question. Bishlama bava dereisha. The reason is that the first scenarios where the Baal Habayis or the Ani does nothing, meaning the scenarios where the one party did everything, those we're not going to be asking up because pater umutter lo ketani. When we're talking about scenarios where you're fully exempt, meaning in the first scenario where the poor person does everything, he takes his basket and brings it inside. So what's the ruling for the Baal Habayis when he's just holding his hands? Completely exempt. Nothing, right? That we're not going to be talking about. Why?
Well, Well, you're saying fully exempt, but putter is not.
Putter, what the Mishnah is saying, putter mutter. It must be fully fully mutter, which we're going to question in a second. El bava de seifa de pater vel asar kasha. The reason we're asking this question is because the bava de seifa, the scenario at the end where they are both exempt from the biblical, from bringing a chatas, but still are asar. That's where the question is. That's why we're asking. There should be 12. Okay, let's pause over here. We're not done yet, but I want to just go quickly through a Tosfos over here on the side, because Tosfos asks a very fundamental question. This comes up all the time. There is a scenario, something called, there are two prohibitions that relate to assisting people in doing averos. Okay, it is forbidden to help someone sin. Okay, what's the prohibition? Right? If someone wants to do something wrong, and someone wants to, I don't know, let's say another example given in the Gemara is a Nazir, someone who cannot drink wine, wants to drink wine, and they ask me for a cup of wine, and I pour them a cup of wine, and let's say, then that might be Lifnei Iver. When's it Lifnei Iver? Only if I'm the only access they have to wine, okay? But let's say you have a scenario where they could have gotten wine from anywhere, right? There still is a prohibition. What's that called? That's called Misayeya, which I'm still helping them, right? So I'm not allowed to help someone do something wrong. This comes up a lot, or we don't realize it. There's an exact question of bringing somebody, the example for those of you who speak Chaver. Can I give someone food where they're going to eat food and they're not going to make a bracha? Maybe right. So maybe they could get the food somewhere else, but am I helping them? Am I helping them if I serve food in my house and they're not going to wash their hands to dime, or they're going to eat the food and they're not going to say a bracha? Am I actually assisting them in doing something wrong? It's a major question, right? Let's not so right. And this comes up a lot. This comes up in therapists, right? Are therapists allowed to guide someone doing something which is prohibited? Is that lifnei iver? Is that at the very least misayeh? Probably not lifnei iver, but maybe misayeh. I'm assisting someone in doing something wrong, right? So this is something which anytime someone is doing something wrong that I in some way relate to, there's a major shaila about what I'm allowed to do. So Tosfos asks this question. Tosfos says, wait a second. In the first scenario, where the Baal Habayis is just standing there with his hands, right? So it's not lifnei iver. Why is it not lifnei iver? Again, let's go through the scenario. Now we'll slow down, okay? The poor person has his basket, right? And he picks up his basket from the public domain and puts it into the private domain, right? So he did everything, right? Now he could have done it whether the Baal Habayis opened his door, or whether the Baal Habayis was there or not. Whether the Baal Habayis was standing with his hands or not, he could have taken his basket and brought it inside, right? However, the Baal Habayis is holding his hands open, and he's catching the baskets. Did he just help the person sin? Yes. He helped the person sin, right? He helped the person sin. And therefore, Tosfos asks, wait a second, how could you tell me the first case, the Baal Habayis is completely pater mutter, he did nothing wrong, he helped someone sin. This guy outside is moving things from domain to domain, and the Baal Habayis is assisting him in some way. It should be asr completely, it should be asr for him, right?
We're talking about pater or asr regarding Shabbos.
Excellent. So good. So the Rashba says what you're saying. The Rashba says, yeah, in this context of Shabbos is pater val mutter. Tosfos doesn't like that answer. He says, how could the Gemara say something which is not true? You're right. In the context of the laws of Shabbos, you're pater val mutter, but regarding Misayeya, it's still asr. That's what the Rashba says. Good, excellent. But Tosfos gives a whole scenario where we're talking about a non-Jew, and the non-Jew is using his own items, and therefore there's no issue with Misayeya because it's non-Jew. Where this gets interesting, well, even more interesting, is as follows. There is an opinion which Ramosha Feinstein rules upon, which many rely upon in many scenarios, and that is that if someone doesn't observe the mitzvos whatsoever, right? If someone doesn't care about them, let's say someone completely they don't keep Shabbos, they basically say, I don't keep Shabbos whatsoever, right? Does the law of Misayeh apply to that person? Right? So the simple reading is, yeah, you can't help anyone do an Avera. Why could you help someone just because they don't keep Shabbos? Why could you help them do an Avera? But there is a lenient opinion, which Ramosha and other poskim invoke, and that is that if someone really doesn't keep Shabbos, then the laws of Misayeh don't apply. So let's say again the scenario, or let's say the guy comes to your house for a meal, right? And they want to eat, but they don't keep brachos, they don't keep whatever, they don't keep mitzvos, right? So then you're allowed to serve them since anyways Misayeh doesn't apply. Or let's say you invite someone to Shabbos, they might be doing something wrong, and they might be driving, or they might be doing something wrong, but since they anyways don't keep Shabbos, maybe there's more leniency. And the poskim actually rule like this. But the challenge is, so why don't any of the Rishonim over here use that as an answer? The easy answer is to say, you know why it's pater completely over here? Don't tell me it's a non-Jew, which is a complete stretch, right? Tell me we're talking about one of the parties over here is someone who doesn't keep Shabbos, and therefore be completely pater and mutter, right? But no one does say that answer. The fact that no one says that answer would imply that that's not really a thing. That there is no such leniency, that if someone doesn't keep Shabbos or doesn't keep mitzvos, then this law of Messiah doesn't apply. The fact that they don't answer it implies that it's not really, there's no such leniency, right? You're with me? In other words, the fact that Tosfos, the Rashba don't answer that, so this is a major question. I haven't seen any answers that I'm personally comfortable with. So food for thought. We'll leave it this. The bottom line is, it's worth noting that many poskim are lenient, do have this leniency, and are lenient in trying scenarios where you're really stuck, where a person could rely on this, that if someone really doesn't keep Shabbos, really doesn't keep mitzvos, there is no law of Messiah, and you are allowed to do something even though you know they're not going to keep the mitzvos. They're going to do something, like, again, you could serve food to someone, bring food to your office where people are going to be eating food, and they don't know, I know they're not going to make a bracha, but if they're not makbid about brachos or whatever it is, then maybe Messiah doesn't apply. But this topic, this Tosfos over here, and the Rashba and all the Rishonim over here, is really a question on that leniency. Nonetheless, again, many of the poskim do rely on that leniency in trying circumstances. We'll pick up tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.